Welcome to the Yellowhorn Podcast, a place that compiles everything you need to know about the competitive TCG world of Pokemon. I'm PJ Witusik. I am the manager of the Shuffle Squad here with my lovely co-host Zach. Zach, you can say hello.
Yo, how's it going? I'm Zach Lesage. I'm the pro team manager and social media manager for the Shuffle Squad. So, if you've never watched the Elhorn before, it used to be a podcast between myself and Maddie Tate, who's another content creator. Shout out to them. PG and I kind of took it over for the Shuffle Squad. And maybe for our own use, I don't know, we're not sure. But we're going to bring everything that you need to know about Pokemon, what's going on from a competitive sense. So, we're a lot of topics that we'll discuss overall throughout the whole podcasts. Whenever we have a new episode, we're going to try to do weekly, but it might end up being bi-weekly. That being said, new decks, new tournament results, stuff going on in the community, the stuff you want to hear on your daily commute. So what are we going over today, PJ?
We're going to go over a couple of the events that happened this past weekend. We're going to take a look at some of the final remaining events of the season and maybe what you could do to help yourself get to that World Championship CP goal. We're also going to take a look at a few other, like you said, interesting decks that we saw. Take a look at maybe some team decks for the Shuffle Squad as well, and see what else is out there, what you need to know about the current TCG meta for Pokemon.
Yeah, sick. So, I mean, we had three major events over the
Yeah.
past weekend. So we had Portland Regionals, Sao Paulo Regionals, and we had Champions League in Japan. I went to Portland Regionals. PJ went to none of them. Shout out to PJ for staying at home.
Yes, yes.
And
I got this lovely tan, as you can see if you're
yeah,
watching
and
this on YouTube.
you can see if you're watching on YouTube, I literally look like I've been on. Maybe the Pacific Northwest gloom really got to me because I feel like I've seen a ghost or something. That being said, let's kind of kick it off with Portland because I think a lot of players when they look at these events, at least the way that I've always looked at it, the U.S. regionals typically get the most kind of coverage. But if anyone, it's still pretty fresh. It just happened a couple days ago. So let's start off with Portland regionals and we kind of compare them all. Kicking things off, we had Arctina winning. I don't know if that's something that I expected or not.
It was on my radar, I'd say, for a deck, but winning the event, I definitely did not expect that. I know that when Zach, you and I went to EUIC, I got bodied in round 2 and 3 of Arctina because Judge Path is very strong. And obviously, watching throughout the stream for TPCI, we got to see this deck in full action, especially against our team members too. But just showing the power. Arc is such a great card. Obviously, able to use the V-Star ability to find any two cards, but just using that, slamming down a path, hitting the judge, putting your opponent to 4 cards, then having a backup attacker of Giratina V-Star is just insane. It can hit those numbers that you need. You throw a choice build on it. It can really OHKO pretty much anything out there. So, Zach, what are your thoughts on the deck as a whole?
So my thoughts are like I had a few like players that like reached out to me before coaching wise, before the event. They're like, should I play this or should I play Arctura? And I'm like, Arctura 1, Arctura stops a lot of the metagame. Arctina loses to this, and I'm like literally counting. I'm like inventing fingers and stuff like that. To me, this seems kind of like the slow and steady deck, and I think it really shows the power of Judge Path the best. I don't even know if anyone watched the stream. There was a lot of key moments where Squavit was just like the MVP. It seems like it because Squavit allows you. It's kind of like a Marnie, right? Where you shuffle your hand, you put it at the bottom of your deck, then you rip the top card. So it's one of those moments where like I played Lost Unbox. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I kind of need something. I really hope I can get it off Flower Gathering. And when you get it, you're like, it's the Eureka moment. In this case, there was a lot of like defining moments with that Squavit, just like stealing games. I think the biggest one kind of floating around Twitter is one versus Grant, where they just got like the rip to win the game. And it's moments like that where sure Squavit can do it. And if we look at it from a mathematical, statistical approach, sure things could happen and maybe there is better odds. But it did look kind of rad if you're if you're Landon. Did look kind of bad if you were Grant. In a way where it's just like it feels bad.
It was definitely a feels bad moment for sure. And And just being able to have the backup of Bibarel too, that's something that not a lot of people talk about. And I think that when we saw Landon on stream, Landon was playing against a lot of Lost Box, and you didn't necessarily want to bench your Bibarel or, the Bidoof on the bench because that's just bait to get knocked out by something like a Sableye or maybe a Greninja. But any other deck that's playing can use a Skullvet, and you go down to one card, but then you get to draw four more cards after that, so you could judge Skullvet and then Bibarel, and the power is there. Adding the Arc plus the Dragon, and doesn't have weakness. Also, another key factor, doesn't really have an ability, works with Path. So all of these things congeal into a really powerful deck.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that, like, when it comes to a deck like this, I wasn't necessarily expecting this deck to win, but this deck doesn't, it certainly has the capabilities to win. I think it's in a similar case of Miraidon EX. I don't want to get it too ahead of myself or anything else like that, because I still feel like this is our second tournament that we've had in kind of global, not including Sao Paulo, that we'll cover shortly, but it's one of those things where Arctina might just be better than we think it is, and we just don't necessarily know how well rounded it is. So maybe it's a deck that if you haven't already tested out, put it back onto your testing kind of circle or whatever. Like, I don't know. Yeah. I'm building this deck up. I think it's one of the top 10 decks in format. As much as I don't think it's one of the top 10 decks, I have to test it again. So with Cups challenges, maybe you're heading south to Bogota special event this weekend. I wouldn't be surprised if this deck saw a little bit more play.
Yeah, absolutely. And then coming in at second place, a deck that you and I were kind of hyping up is Lugia. And Zach, I like Reagan's take on Lugia, and I think that adding that Urshifu back in there, that's something that we were talking about going into EUIC. Should we play the Urshifu? Should we maybe play a Duraludon in there? We ended up going with a couple other counters, but I really do like this build. I think that if you flip it the right way and you run hot enough, Lugia is a phenomenal deck in the meta. There's so much counter ability. It's great against Lost Box for the most part. I think it's an awesome deck.
Yeah, I think so too. It's one of those ones where Lugia in a blind metagame seems kind of weird, but when it has specific matchups that it's very strong against, like this deck to me pretty much beats Tina. It's a deck that scared Tina out of the formats. I normally I would have thought that this would have been a pretty good matchup against Arctina, but 4-path could be scary. But Lost Zone Box, this deck absolutely destroys Lost Zone Box, or has a very favorable matchup. I know I hit a few Lugia's day 2 of Portland with my Lost Zone Sablezard, and it was a really tough matchup. That Radiant Serena is one of the scariest cards that you'd ever see. So I think that Regan's list is just an enhancement to most of the lists that we saw at EUIC. Definitely, like, I looked over this deck a lot, and I'm like, I don't think there's really anything that I want to change off the top. It just, like, default standard list, probably better than playing the Duraludon package, because Lugia went down in play, meaning that Duraludon's not going to be super great. Single Strike Urshifu VMAX gives you an opportunity to get through it, and we have a lot of opportunities to see success. So if you want to play Lugia, I think you definitely want to be playing this list. Maybe this list is going to repopularize the deck a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the addition of the single prize attackers, now if Arctina is going to be higher numbers for these next upcoming events, then obviously hitting with a fighting attacker into Arc just to stop them from V-starring on you, I really think that it's a strong play. Taking a look at some of the other decks, there's notable decks in here, especially from our team members, Alex Szymanski and Grant Manley, both playing their own kind of spin on the standard Lost Zone Box decks that we've seen, adding in Kyogre, noticing the meta doesn't necessarily have all that bench protection. The Manaphy's are coming out of lists or going lower in lists, and obviously Mew was really hyped up going into this event too. We saw a lot of cups that had Mews at top placements alongside Lost Box. So I really like the play of adding Kyogre back into these lists. We did have a friend of ours, Andrew Gatner, also playing Lost Zone Box. So that's spots 3, 4, and 5. So there was lots of presence of Lost Zone Box, the translation into day 2 and then into top 8, it was there. So I can appreciate it. I still think Lost Zone Box is a great deck if you're a good pilot at it or you've been testing it quite a bit. If you're comfortable with a deck, go with a deck. You're still going to get the CP that you need if you're trying to go for a CP event, or if you really just want to have fun. I think it's a great deck all around for not only, cups, but also challenges, because it can really hit great matchups, and you don't necessarily brick as often as you would with those bigger V and V star decks that we're seeing out there.
So yeah, I think the one thing that I do want to note is that Lost Zone Box decks are going to vary. So both Grant and Alex both played a Kyogre build, except Grant's looks different than Alex's because Grant's is based off of a turbo build, playing for a Sealstone, similar to what Andrew Gantner played, but Alex played very similar to what Nick Moffat played at EUIC with a Kyogre, Galarian Moltres, no Battle VIP pass list. A lot of interesting stuff going on there. I think that Lost Zone Box is kind of... you could definitely be inspired by other decks or other Lost Zone builds, and I don't necessarily know if we have a defined version. Like I said, I played Sablezard at the event too. I think that's a valid variant. I think there's lots of lists that played Sky Seal Stone. I think there's a lot of lists that played a lot of different stuff. And I think that's kind of where we're at with the deck is I don't think we have a defined Lost Zone Box variant. I do want to make a bold statement that Lost Zone Box in some capacity is the best deck in format. The top players are playing the best deck in format. And I don't want to be like, Landon Caitlor won the regionals, is not a top player. Shout out to them, shout out to Reagan, shout out to whatever. I'm talking about, we look at the top, top 5 players in North America. I think the absolute best players at the event, Azul, Grant, Alex, Cal Connor, the list goes on. A lot of them are playing Lost Zone Box. So that's one thing that I want to point out. If you want to play with the best, you either want to play Lost Zone Box or beat Lost Zone Box. That's really where I'd be looking at going forward. I think that's really where our metagame is shifting. Rounding things off with the metagame. We kind of had a Mew VMAX, a Miraidon, and an Arc Dura with Umbreon that made top 8. I think Mew VMAX is probably kind of normal to be there. It seems fair.
It was really good. There's obviously the 2 different builds. You had the more control archetype, which was the all DTE with the path. Now that's going to a quad judge build with the quad vacuum. So you got the lost vacuums to get rid of your paths in play. Cut the Oricorio out just for straight consistency. And then other people were trying to go in the more aggressive route and use the Fusion Strike build, so you have that turn 1 donk or turn 1 knockout, just to put yourself in a higher tempo of game state and then move forward into the tournament just to get those higher placings and not necessarily tie, because that's something else that, if you're not experienced as a Lost Zone Box player, you're probably going to tie because you have a lot of decision making to be doing, and that's again why the top players are playing Lost Zone Box. But I really do like this build. Austin Drake had a 6th place finish here with Mew, and I've seen this again pop up at Cups. Going back to what you were talking about, seeing Miraidon and Flaffy in the top 8 was kind of interesting. So I've been experimenting with a few other builds I've seen online of Miraidon. I know it's kind of a bad deck because it's just, it doesn't put out the power as fast as you want. It doesn't always hit with your electric generators, but the Flaffy engine is kind of interesting. It seems like it takes a terrible matchup to Lost Zone Box, because you've got all those 90 hit point Flaffies sitting on your bench, but maybe it's good enough to just overpower some things and just start hitting hard, similar to how Mew is. I've seen some builds that are full on gusting, and they just put 2 prizers in, they echoing horn them back, they hit it with another Miraidon EX, and go from there. So maybe a lot of people are kind of sleeping on this build.
I do want to run in there. So with PokeStats Live, shout out to everyone at the PokeStats team and Jared Grimes with the PokeStats Live. We could see what a player's run was, because I was like, you want to know what? I feel like if I was a Lost Zone Box deck, I would gobble up this deck that can't really heal and My
Yeah.
deck played double Mana Fee, so I'm not worried about, because I think the Magnezone V-Star has some sniping attack, right?
Mm-hmm.
90/90.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a
Yep.
Greninja. So they played against two unknown decks. And not like
Mm-hmm.
unknown V-Star, just like decks we cannot know what it is. Um,
Not unknown hand either. No.
so they won the first two. They lost against an Arctina, which I think should typically be a
Yeah.
pretty good matchup.
Mm-hmm.
They tied against a Comfey Turbo Andrew Ganner. They tied against
Yes.
Andy playing Turbo Lost Zone Box. Then they
Right.
beat a Miraidon. They beat another unknown deck,
Mm-hmm.
and then they Arc Lugia Mew Tina Gudra Lugia Dura. Then they played against. They tied Alex into top 8. Then they lost
Yep.
against Grant. So I think in any
Mm-hmm.
opportunity where Lost Zone Box had a full chance to play, I'm not sure what happened with the Andy Gander game.
Yeah.
Round 4. Anytime you can get into a rough situation in Lost Zone Box, I've seen some pretty horrific games. So maybe Andy pulled out the tie there.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this deck loses to Lost Zone Box, and that's one of the
Yeah.
reasons why players are saying it's bad. Maybe it's good
Yeah.
against like 60% of the metagame or something like that. They seem to hit the 60% of the metagame.
Right. Yeah. So they just had a great run into the tournament, and sometimes that happens. You know, you and a group of people will go into a tournament, all play the same deck, and then all have different placements because of the run that you had throughout the day. I mean, Zach can attest to that playing Arctura. A few people from our group would bring it, and all different placements scattered across the board, and it all depends on what you hit throughout the day. So if you know that the meta call is heavy Lost Zone Box, maybe don't play a deck like this. I still think it has some outs, but if you look at the percentages, win rate versus Lost Zone Box, it isn't good. But it is good if we see more and more of things like the Arc deck pop up. Maybe that is the direct counter to the Arctina deck that could be heavily popularized these next few weekends.
The other deck that I want to go over, well, I mean, it's the only other deck. We only have the top 8 results, and
Yep.
we've probably already gone over a lot of these decks a lot, but I think the Arc Dura Umbreon deck looks sick.
Yes.
And you can see if anyone's watching at home, my little cable here keeps on falling off my ear. It's just that exciting.
Yes.
To anyone listening at home, literally picture a cable that I have duct taped to my headset so it doesn't fall out, keeps on falling off. I don't know entirely how this deck works because Umbreon VMAX is cool. Probably good against Mew VMAX. I'd say in some capacity. Duraludon VMAX is good against some decks. I sat beside a lot of these players as the day went on. Most notably the game of Makani Tran. When they were playing against Danny Altavilla, I saw them do this sick play of Radiant Alakazam, moving some damage around from their opponent's Pokemon, dropping a Halucha, and then finishing the game off. This deck had some weird cards going on into it, and while I don't necessarily know how I fully understand how this deck goes, and I'm not going to pretend like I know, obviously it's like an Arc deck, power up Pokemon, do different matchups, but I'm sure that they could explain the deck in much more in-depth strategy. I do think that this deck is the element of surprise is there in a closed deck list fashion. So I don't think no one's expecting Radiant Alakazam Halucha to come get you. I don't think Danny, when he played against Makani, was ready to see that Halucha hit the board afterwards. And the way that I saw him scoop, it was just such a wow, you got me moment. Like you had the thick card that I didn't think you'd have. I thought it was a cool deck. I'm not sure if this deck's gonna whatever, but these Arc Pile decks or different Arceus variants do seem like they have a lot of opportunities to see success.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're testing, there's some skill expression when it comes into any sort of Arceus deck. If you saw Alex's finish at EUIC, nobody would be brave enough to play that now. Alolan Vulpix is heavily countered. I feel like now in the meta, people know about Alolan Vulpix. So that's the same reason, a deck like this is kind of cool to see. Obviously, being able to maneuver in different paths and then making some decisions. There's a lot of decision making in a deck build like this, even though at its base it is just Arctura, which normally doesn't involve too many decisions. But I think that just showing some skill expression with adding the Umbreon and the extra tech package makes this deck really cool. So it's worth a test. It's worth a playthrough at least, if nothing else. But hopefully we'll see some more in the next oncoming weeks, because this meta is going to continue for a little while into the newer format, because Paldea Evolved is right around the corner. So I think that we'll see a few more Arc decks before the run here on just Scarlet and Violet bases out.
For sure. Kind of jumping into our next regional that we want to go over, we have a lot less information on this one.
Mm-hmm.
So far, we only have the first and second list. Everything else is very, we don't know. So we
Right.
know that Lost Zone Turbo deck won Sao Paulo. And again, I
Mm-hmm.
think this is one of those cases where Lost Zone decks are typically the best. This is kind of a, I always think of tournaments, it's like, if we could play a tournament 100 times, do I think Lan and Kaler would have won more than once? As much as I like Lan and Kaler and they're a great player and I've played against them before, I don't think that Arctina deck is going to have that Squabit plot armor like it did at the tournaments. Where I do feel like the Lost Zone box players like Grant and Alex and Azul are going to make top 8 more often than not, which is going to prove that the deck and skill kind of handshakes in the middle, and it's going to be that inherent strength. Nothing that I saw that was like kind of crazy about this list. Is to me looks like a pretty standard Lost Zone Turbo list. They do play the Sky Seal Stone, a card that a lot of players have been cutting out, but nonetheless, very solid build of the deck. And then Mew ended up coming in second with some interesting cards. Dreepy, they got the technology, and Pidgeot V, the other technology, to avoid decking out and benching and kind of infinite locking our opponents.
Yeah. I know Path was pretty big, but I would assume that the Pidgeot V is just, to stop, again, like decking out, but maybe there was a little bit more stall that was scary for that player
Sure.
in that meta. And, obviously the text there with the Dreepy that we saw a few tournaments back, I want to say a couple of regionals ago, we saw Dreepy get teched in there when Aerodactyl was big. Wondering if we see more Arc decks. Maybe does Aerodactyl V-Star come back? Who knows? But what was interesting about this top 8 list is that there was a Gardevoir list that we didn't see over in Portland in top 8. So Gardevoir, obviously the most played deck in Portland, didn't make a top 8 spot at all, which is kind of insane. So
I'm telling you,
most
PJ, I'm pissed. I literally,
yeah.
like, while I'm sitting here, day 2 of Portland, and I'm like, sick, my deck absolutely bodies Gardevoir. I played against
Yeah.
Alec Geisler, that had a really poor start, but I gobbled up their whole field, and it was one of my easier matchups of the day, even though they played it very well. Just a super favorable matchup. I'm sitting beside, like, Gardevoir Mirrors and Mew Mirrors, decks that I typically do well, while I'm playing against Lugia, while I'm playing against Gudra. I hit Grant Manley, and we're like, Gardevoir Mirror, Mew Mirror, and I'm like, really, dude? So I think the Gardevoir is just like, they realized they don't beat Lost Zone Box, and they were hitting themselves more often than not.
Right.
I don't know, until there's a Gardevoir deck that beats Lost Zone Box, and maybe you could play Mewtwo V Union and Klefki. I think Grant Shen and Aiden Koos played that. I originally thought that deck was pretty much just like bad. I said it at my last League Cup, where I'm like, just play a different deck. Maybe there's some more merit as players want to adapt their Gardevoir decks.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to retract that statement. I'll admit where I could be wrong. I think maybe with the amount of Lost Zone Box, we probably want to go Mewtwo V Union, Klefki at this point. Maybe?
Yeah, I agree with the Mewtwo V Union, because you don't necessarily see a lot of dark attackers that can blow up a Mewtwo V Union unless that Umbreon starts to show up more and more as people test that deck out. That was something I was talking with Cal about the other day, is that, Mewtwo V Union seems really good in a huge sea of things like Lugia and Lost Zone Box. There's so many ways that you can just annihilate your opponent with Mewtwo V Union, and I think that the general merit was maybe there's some scary dark Pokemon in the meta right now, but also looking at everything, people knew, watching the EUIC run with Tord, they saw the newer build, it was a better build than everybody else had been testing prior to EUIC, and they said, what, that's the build, that's what we're going to go with. So in turn, when a deck is known, it usually gets heavily countered, and I think that that's exactly what happened in these regionals here, is that so many people knew how to play that matchup now, and that's something to attest for, my specific run in this past season too, is that I know what deck is going to be played pretty often, and at the end of the day, you just have to play what you know is good. You know, what you've tested, what feels the best, and not necessarily, you know, what you think you're going to see and what matchups, because you're not going to win every single matchup. And I think that the Gardevoir placements here are really something to speak on, that we could see. You know, these other decks came out in full force and they were just good decks. And it didn't matter what they hit, and they were just great, and they had a great run. You know, we see some Sablezard here in top 8 too in Sao Paulo. We've got just a turbo Lost Unbox twice. And then there was also the Arctina list again, as well as
Yeah,
Lugia.
Arctina
So,
seems like it's a theme that it's like popping up around. 'Cause
yeah.
I think it also, while we don't have the results here, or maybe I'm missing it, it also won Singapore
Yeah,
regionals,
yeah,
right, with Cash Vendor Singh. So shout out to Cash
yeah.
Man for winning with
Yeah, shout out
Arctina.
Cash.
So it's one of those things where, yeah, I think
Got
the
there.
metagame's interesting. They're very similar. Like if we look at like as much as it's different, I think we want to look at the similarities. Lawson
Yeah.
Box was majority of this top cuts. Mew was more represented in Sao Paulo. Maybe it's a regional difference. Both had one Lugia. You could be
Yeah.
that token Lugia in top cut, but I do think it might be a tough one. Similar to how the Arctina deck was not there's decks that like the Maridon deck was avoiding Lost Zone Box. I think William probably avoided Lost Zone Box. Either that or we don't even know what's in their list, to be honest. Maybe they have
Right.
that hot tech and they just didn't want to share it or something. Maybe they're going to Bogota.
Yeah.
Regardless, I think it's time for us to look at the Champions League Niigata. I don't know if I've pronounced that right, but it's the Champions League from Japan that happened. Around 2,800 players, so massive. This is one where Gardevoir is actually winning in.
Yeah, I think the big thing here to note is that looking into the newer format, you know, we're pretty close, like I said, to the new set releasing June. It's going to come out, and then we'll have all these regionals. NAIC will most likely be the first regional that we're allowed to play the Paldea Evolved cards as well, or something close to there. But Iono in these decks is just insane. Plus, you know, you have the new special energy card that's in here, so now you're adding an extra 3 energy. That's played as a 4 of, especially if you go behind. And then you're playing Iono, which is very similar to N, if N and Marnie had a baby. If you're not familiar with what that card does, you shuffle your hand, you and your opponent both do the same thing, put it under your deck, and then you draw the amount of cards that are equal to your prize cards. So, you know, you go behind, your opponent's taking a couple 2 prize knockouts, they've only got 2 prize cards left, and that is just going to put you in such a great spot. You've already got enough energy in the discard pile to blow something up with your Gardevoirs, your Zacians, your Mewtwo V Unions. It's all there. The tools are all there, and I think that that's something that you don't see in the current meta, but we will see, and that's why in a tournament that's twice as big as a North American regional, right? We see this. It is a best of 1. We have to take that into account too. So these decks are consistent, if nothing else. There might be some sneaky techs in
Either
here.
that or they're built for best of 1. Because sometimes they might be like going under those techs, or maybe they have some really cool techs to beat them in best of 1 that surprises them. They might be built differently slightly than how we build them by the time NAIC rolls around in North America.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So we go for consistency with a best of 3, and then they're just a best of 1 format. So that's something to consider whenever you look at the Japanese meta too. But we are seeing some Gudra. We are seeing more of the Lost Zone Giratina builds. So instead of the Arctina, which Arctina's still good. It looks like Judge Path still rocking it out there, but the additional energy here, and I always forget the name of that extra energy.
I think it's is it reversal?
It's jet energy in this list. So jet energy, where it's able to switch to the active, similar to, you know, using a switch or a switch card or escape rope. Put your Comfy in such a better place to go and search out those cards, because now you're adding more search plus the energy into a deck like this. That's where Lugia is seeing more play as a colorless build over in Japan now too, because you're able to put the Weird Ear V down and then switch it out with Jet Energy. These are all new cards that are coming out that don't seem like they're going to highly perform or make decks highly perform, but really just changes the metagame. So I love to see what Japan has to offer in these bigger tournaments too. We're still seeing some Mew played because Mew's obviously a great deck, but Mew Meloetta is really what we see over there, just to get that turn one donk in case Gardevoirs are coming out, because you see that they have more setup. There's more setup involved in a stage 2 deck than there is in anything else. So just trying to capitalize on that is what I notice on these type of lists and for this type of tournament.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to go over the whole top 16 in terms of like giving everyone a constructed count, Gardevoir was the highest deck seen in top 16 at 5. Tina was number 4.
Right.
Or was 4 count. It was the second deck, 4 count. Got Lasso Box with 2, Mew with 2, Arc with 1, Lugia with 1, Gudra with 1.
Right.
This tells me that Gardevoir and Tina are like the best decks if we're looking towards the NAIC metagame. And I believe that this format had Paldea evolved cards, or the equivalent of Paldea evolved cards.
Right.
So there's no Chen Pao, there was no Ting Lu, or any of these other ones that we've seen a lot of players kind of hype up.
Right.
There were the Gardevoirs. The other thing that's notable in, we'll kind of bring it to the Twitter sphere of Jake Gearhart. It's funny how the Yellowhorn podcast has a weird relationship with Jake Gearhart, talking about him in almost every podcast. But he definitely stirs the pot on Twitter in either constructive ways or has some kind of based opinions. I'll use the word based because I think it's a good one for today. Jake tells us that we want to be playing Champions Festival in Mew. Comes up with some compelling reasons to play, or not in Mew, in Gardevoir. So we want to be playing Champions Festival in Gardevoir. You want to make sure that you're playing it because it's a path counter, and there's a Drifloon from Scarlet Violet that it does damage based off the damage, and basically you could bump path, heal a damage counter with Champions Festival, because you almost always have 6 in play, and allows you to get to the range of 310 damage, instead of just being short and not knocking out a Gardevoir EX or a Mew VMAX, or 310 is a pretty important number when it comes to Pokemon. That being said, Twitter kind of goes crazy. A lot of longtime players take this card that was reasonably only a collector's card, seen very limited play across the board, and Champions Festivals goes stonks. In Japan, they're actually... we'll go over this. The foreign copies that you get are generally a little bit cheap, and they hover in the $100 to $300 range, about US dollars or something like that. Right. I was actually able to pick up 2 Champs Festivals in French, because I actually am Canadian. And I picked those up for $50, $60 a piece. So I was kind of hyped about that. Shout out to Canada, Festival des Champions. And so we go to North America, we go for the English copies, which are universally played everywhere. So no borders, because I can only play my copies at NAIC, Worlds, Canadian League Cups, Canadian Regionals, and Europe. I can't play it in South America unless I'm playing at internationals or Worlds or anything. Regardless, English you could play anywhere. Those copies are going anywhere between like 400 to 800, give or take. And they're not easy cards to find. You just don't have like... It's not like an Alt-Art Gardevoir where every kid... Like, there's a kid at every league that has one in their binder that's not going to trade. Champs Festivals are only available to players who have staffed Worlds, won world, like did well at Worlds, got Worlds invites, stuff like that. So even though that they've had it 2013, 14, 15, 16, we can go all the way to 2022. That card is really... PJ, do you own a Champs Festival?
I don't own a Champs
That's what
Festival.
I'm saying. Like, you just can't find them, right?
And I've been collecting cards since base set. So that's what I'm saying. You know, you have to be a specific person or know a specific person to borrow them from. And it's almost the opposite of what TPCI and just Pokemon in general creates for the community as a trading card game. It's not anything like, you know, Magic the Gathering or any of these other Yu-Gi-Oh, things like that, where the cards are more attainable. The cards are cheaper. And that's for a reason, because they want the players to be at a leveled playing field for the most part to be able to obtain these cards. But really with Champions Festival, it's the opposite. And that's why it's so controversial, is that, you know, Champions Festival is just one of those, you know, they're just like Zach said, a collector's piece, difficult to find, expensive.
So I do want to
Nothing that you
go
want to hear.
to finish off my point. So with the
Yeah.
English copies being 400 to 800, and I know I have a long-winded rant about almost everything,
Yeah.
the Japanese copies are going for 1500. So if you imagine yourself being a normal-ish player that's hasn't really played in Worlds or might have sold yours, because most competitors sell them to collectors at Worlds to help fund their trips. Like for a player traveling Japan to London last year, they could have sold their kit for $800, thought they were like ripping off the collector, doing good money because Worlds hasn't been around for a while. Those cards spiked up. We're all the suckers, whatever. So there might be a reason why we're not seeing Champs Festivals in these Japanese lists, because they're harder to come by.
Right.
Very similar to how they had some printings with Battle VIP Pass and Cramomatic, I believe, with their gym promo cards that were quite hard to achieve. Someone in the comments can collect us if you're on YouTube or on Spotify, or hit us up and let us know if you know about the Japanese collecting lore. But cards are not necessarily printed everywhere equally, and the Japanese copies seem somehow cost more money. That being said, we might see slightly different lists in North America as players have access to a card that's still $500 on average, 3 times cheaper than Japan.
Right. Right. So leading into that, you might see them at your local leagues. You might see them at any of the regionals coming up here pretty soon. But that kind of leads us into talking about the end of the season, because that's really what we're rounding out is Q4 of the season for Pokemon right now. We're going to see Worlds in Japan in August, which right now it's May, so technically we've only got 3 more months until we have to start getting ready to fly ourselves over to Japan for the World Championships. And that begs the question, are you ready? Do you have enough CP? Are you at that point?
Do you know where you need to get your CP from?
Yes, exactly. That's the point here. So, Zach, why don't you talk to me a little bit more about getting CP from League Challenges and League Cups? Because I know you've been going through a few of them here.
Sure.
In recent times, I saw you posted about your Sablezard run at your local cup, which was
you say local, but I mean I traveled 2.5, 3 hours to that cup. I mean, shout out to the Greater Toronto area for having a bajillion stores. It's not always easy being a Canadian playing Pokemon, but with League Cups and League Challenges, as much as our stores have a lot of fierce competition, we do have a lot of cups and challenges to choose from. So if anyone's been kind of sleeping under a rock or joining the game recently, League Cups and League Challenges are back. They started basically, about a month ago?
Yeah, a month ago.
Maybe 3 weeks ago, something like that. EUIC weekend, if anyone wants to. They basically allowed it. So Pokemon, as they've lifted their COVID precautions, starting off with no longer need a vaccination, no longer need a mask. Now we have local events back in most areas. And you can get points from cups and challenges. Now, they usually are based on a quarter system that follow in between the internationals. This is probably the best way to put it. So at the start of the season, whatever. The way that we have it for this one is we have the cups and challenges 1 quarter. You can get 2 cups, 2 challenges as your best finish limit. And you can see how that goes to get you some points towards Worlds. Challenges are kind of small-ish events that are way more on a local scale. Cups get a little bit bigger and offer more championship points. That being said, there's a whole bunch. I'm trying to hit up as many as I can per weekend. Not because I'm looking for points, but more or less, my wife is very close, Michelle Lesage, to getting her invite. So we've kind of planned out the rest of the season. Literally, I canceled Milwaukee last night because she got her 6 regionals finish. And it's better for us to go to cups because we can get more points at a cup or a challenge than a regionals at that point. So knowing where to get your points can be huge. And I heavily suggest reaching out to a top player. Maybe you have someone in your local scene who knows how to get an invite, or you see them get an invite to Worlds. Or even if you don't have anyone in your area, let's say if you live in the middle of nowhere, maybe you want to reach out to a coach on Metafy. Not even just me, anyone, because most of them will tell you how to get an invite. Might be worthwhile because you might be playing events in the wrong area, even though that they're bigger events and offer larger prize pools.
Yeah, exactly. And what I've noticed too is that a lot of these regionals now for the side events are going to host cups as well for the remainder of the season. So if you can't make it to, the locals that you might have, or if you don't want to drive a few hours, maybe take a weekend to go to a cup or something like that, or go to multiple cups. If you're already going to a regionals and say you don't make day 2 for some reason, you still need those extra few points to get your world's qualification, it definitely would not hurt to sign up and at least even get your experience playing more and more cups at these regional events. So that's another way you can try to gain those points or gain some more CP to get you to that world's qualification in your area. So definitely something to keep a lookout for. Now, if we're looking into a couple things, I know that we talked a little bit about the Lost Zone boxes already, but let's kind of touch base on Alex's list. I know we talked about the no battle VIP here, Zach, but I saw obviously Galarian Moltres, a great counter to all of those Dark Week Pokemon. We talked about the Mewtwo V Union. That's something that maybe can see play, but Moltres, if it's up in the rise, Dark Pokemon, just sniping out all of those Dark Weak Pokemon. Mew VMAX also really great there as a counter. So Alex really just made a great meta call, and if Alex does nothing else, it's making a great meta call on every
He's
tournament.
pretty good at Pokemon, our current EUIC champion.
But yeah, so as far as it goes, taking Battle VIP out of the list, we talked about Nick Moffat doing that at EUIC. Do you think we'll see more Lost Zone box take Battle VIP out?
So my buddy Tyler actually took it out of Sablezard, which I told him, which I thought it was incorrect. I still think that it's incorrect for that one. And my thought on the list that we have here with the Moltres and Kyogre, you need to make some space to add in these cool cards. Those to me are really comeback from behind cards. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. These are cards where Galarian Moltres, better in the late game. Kyogre, you want to spend up the whole game thinning out your deck. Snorlax, you want to spend a whole bunch of time. So as long as this deck can survive the first little bits, it gets better with age. It's like a fine wine of a deck. And you want to smoke your opponent with a Snorlax, hit them with the Galarian Moltres, hit them with a Kyogre. So whereas the Sablezard version that I played gets better with Exciting Heart or whatever the ability on Radiant Charizard's called reducing the damage, these Pokemon don't need those abilities. They're not subject to Path. They're ready to smoke your opponent, draw multiple prize cards. A game where you end with Kyogre with a properly placed Sableye, you could just draw 4 prize cards. Or maybe against a Mew deck, you could just draw 4 prize cards. Being able to be like, yep, whatever the last turn of the game is, I'm drawing 4 prize cards. Hopefully you prepared for that. Hopefully you Roxanne me. Hopefully. Kyogre is a beast when it works. It's a little bit of a wombo combo. I also think Galarian Moltres is kind of similar to that too. Are you able to get those cards in your hand to make it happen? This deck requires a lot of planning, but I think it's one of the few that can get away with Battle VIP Pass because it has those late game kind of powerhouse combos to make up for the lack of the turn 1.
Absolutely, and I do see maybe an uptick in Fog Crystal to find your Sableye, your Comfey, your Psychic Energy for the Sableye turns, an uptick in the Nest Ball, cutting Battle VIP Pass. You know, it's a dead card most of the time, but it's also a great card to go in your Lost Zone to add to that Lost Zone at the end of the game too. So I could see merit testing out both versions, whether you have Battle VIP Pass or you don't. And I think that Sablezard needs a little bit more queuing up, but I think Sablezard's right up there. Path is pretty easily countered if you're starting to put more Lost Vacuums in there. So maybe even easier to hit because you can use your stadiums to get Radiant Charizard out. You got your Claras. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw these next couple of regionals, maybe Sablezard go back up and play instead of these other variants with Kyogre. So
I have some thoughts on that. I think so at the event, I actually felt like I was on top of the world. I went very favored against, well, I don't want to say like very favored. I think I did pretty favored against most of the Lost Zone decks that I played. That being said, I was also able, like, I had double Manaphy in my list. So I think there's a few key cards that you can play if you want to do well against Lost Zone Box. Mirror. Double Manaphy is cool. Halucha's cool because Halucha allows you to Sableye, get more damage on the board. Switch card is very cool if you're able to plan those to heal some things. A card that I think we're going to see in a lot of lists coming up is Penny. Penny allowing you to reutilize that Halucha Penny allowing
Yes.
you to get 2 prize card Pokemon that might have just been stuck in the active
Yeah.
back to your hand, gone. Because you don't want to have them in
Right.
your discard pile. They can Echoing Horn that back.
Right.
But
And
if you
that's
put it in
another
your...
card that I saw too, is that Echoing Horn is back in lists.
Yeah, you have to, right? Because like
Yeah.
let's say for Alex, you want to bring back another Pokemon. I'm a Kyogre for 250 damage. That's enough to knock it out.
Right.
So I think that we're gonna see some trends, whether it's not even gonna be in the same archetype, because like as much as Grant and Alex both played Kyogre, their lists couldn't look more different. It's Battle VIP, Pass Moltres, stuff like that. It's different. Now, I also think we are going to see. I don't know if Sablezard does it better. I think Sablezard kind of gets to the point very quickly for getting out Sableye and stuff like that. So it can feel like it has an advantage in Mirror. At the same time, we got to be looking at it and being like, yo, it can't really play Snorlax. Snorlax is pretty good in Mirror because it's hard to knock
Yes.
out. And it can't take damage counters from Sableye.
Right. You have to place your damage counters either in the right way to just hit things around Snorlax, because you can't place damage counters on the Snorlax, or you have to play into the Snorlax to know when your big attackers are ready to go, whether it's your Galarian Moltres or your Charizard. Now, we saw a lot of Snorlax come out of Lost Zone box decks, and now in this tournament here for Portland, we saw them come back in because it's just a versatile attacker. If you have those Mirage Gates, it doesn't matter what kind of energy you put on it. It just doesn't matter whatever you have in your hand.
Yeah,
It's not
180
like
for
with
3
Ninja.
is huge. Like, we gotta look
It's
at it
crazy.
being 60 damage per energy, which is
Right.
wild. So, I don't know. I think Snorlax is kind of going stonks. I think that Penny is going stonks. I think Halucha is
Yes.
going stonks. I think Echoing Horn is going stonks. Manaphy is probably going stonks. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw more players playing an extra copy.
Right.
Getting out damage quicker than your opponent is going to be huge when it comes to Lost Zone Mirror.
Right.
And I think that a lot of those cards that we just mentioned are huge. So while I don't necessarily think that there's any build that can encompass them all, because even Radiant Charizard, the one that I've kind of been leaning towards, can put in a bunch of those cards because I have a lot of space. I can't have Snorlax, which might put me at a disadvantage for Mirror sometimes. Maybe not.
Right.
We'll find out.
Yeah.
But I think
Now-
the correct answer for Lost Zone Box going forward is it's probably not the variant. It's probably how it handles the other variants.
And here's my hot take on Lost Zone box lists. Is another thing that we're seeing a downtrend of is Lost City. Now, Lost City is pretty detrimental for all of those one-of attackers in a Lost Zone box list. And once you're able to get them out of the game completely, because these decks are playing multiple Clara, I did notice that over the past few events here this weekend, Lost City has been going further and further down on the list because Path and Judge are just trying to offset that huge hand that Lost Zone box gets. But we're not seeing, the removal of the Pokemon at all like we were seeing with Alex's EUIC list, or maybe some of the Mew builds that are incorporating Lost City to get around, the older format for Regigigas, to get rid of all the Reggies in play.
Yeah, I also do want to point out, if this falls out one more time, I'm just going to end the podcast right there. I swear for next week we were going to get out of it. For anyone watching the video podcast, if this cable keeps on falling out of my headset, I mean, it's working perfectly fine. We just got to make sure that it's a little bit of an older headset, so I don't want it to die, and then PJ is just like mouthing some words looking like a fish underwater. So
we have the budget here on the Yellhorn.
We do have the budget. It's just one of those things where we're pulling together audio writing, all that stuff, but we're getting it under control. Hopefully y'all are still listening. If you're still listening, you might have enjoyed it. Either that or you forgot how to end the podcast. Either way, we suckered y'all in for all that ad revenue.
Yes, we got you to listen here, but I hope you did enjoy the Yellhorn podcast. Zach and I should be here pretty frequently and pretty regularly on the pod as well. So one thing for our listeners, let us know either on our Twitter page or also on our YouTube page in the comments below. You can let us know what topics you want us to discuss on next pod, and we'll be able to cover those too. If you are watching YouTube, definitely check out all of the links for our sponsors below. Zach, is there anything else you wanted to add to this pod here?
No, not really. I think it's one of those things where I think we covered everything that we wanted from a competitive standpoint. In terms of like future topics, as much as we want everyone to let us know what they want to know about, and for sure, maybe you want to hear about PJ's origin story or Zach's villain arc or anything else like that. It's one of those things where we really want to provide the community with a competitive podcast. And I think we really have a really great dynamic here that we can do that for. So with a lot of things coming up, like Paldea Evolved, end of season, a lot of major events still going on. Like, I still think there's like over 10 in globally major events, not including the Asia Pacific region that we typically don't necessarily know what's going on. We will be covering those, making sure you know what's up, covering what's going on with us on a week by week basis, especially with cups, challenges, regional stuff like that. And I mean, I know we're wearing I'm wearing an Astro World shirt, and PJ's wearing he's wearing some kind of shirt. It looks like
wearing a 5K shirt here.
Yeah, he's wearing. There's a harp on there or something. We're gonna definitely shuffle squads at most events globally, whether it's us or our other top players in the game or top content creators in the game, personalities all across the board. So if you see any of us there, by all means, be sure to say hi. And if you're looking to get involved with the Shuffle Squad, I mean, seriously, this thing keeps on falling out. By all means, hit us up. We're always interested in talking to new sponsors, looking for new business opportunities. So I do want to give a shout out to Ultimate Guard, PTCGO Store, Atlas Collectibles, and any other of our sponsors that we have going on with the Shuffle Squad. I'd say that those are probably our main three, if I'm not gapping here on this lovely Wednesday morning, PJ. But that being said, check them out. And by all means, I hope you enjoy this podcast and we continue to provide for the community.
Yep. And this was the Elhorn Podcast. We will catch you on the next episode. Peace out.
The Shuffle Squad is proudly sponsored by Ultimate Guard. Ultimate Guard provides premium protection for your cards. If you need anything from sleeves to deck boxes, then Ultimate Guard has you covered. If you're a player or just a collector, you know that your cards will be protected. Check out their top-of-the-line katana sleeves. These are the best sleeves on the market with a clear window for visibility and provide a perfect shuffle. If you're not a fan of clear windowed sleeves, then Cortexes are for you. These matted sleeves are like their katanas, but at a lower price. Their shuffle is just as good and the protection is superb. So, what are you waiting for? Help support the team by checking out the affiliate link below and ordering some fresh Ultimate Guard products today to get you shuffling.
The Shuffle Squad is proudly sponsored by Atlas Collectibles, the best place to buy any trading card game product online. Visit atlastcg.com and at the checkout screen, make sure to use code TSS12 to save an unbeatable 12% off your entire order. Atlas Collectibles will ship your product anywhere in the world, so make sure you're taking advantage of the 12% savings with TSS12. And if Pokemon is not your thing, don't worry. Go to atlastcg.com and see all the other amazing trading card game products they have there to offer.
The Shuffle Squad is partnered with PTCGO Store to provide our community with the best access to Pokemon TCG codes. They have codes available 24/7, instant email delivery, and you can save 5% off by using code TSS5. If you're a YouTube member or Patreon supporter, you'll have access to a special code that gets you 10% off. So what are you waiting for? Use code TSS5 today and save 5% on your next order of codes on any codes available at ptcgostore.com.
Are you trying to be the best like no one ever was? Now is your time. Head on over to Metafy.gg and search out all our amazing Pokemon TCG coaches where you can book all sorts of training plans ranging from deck help to full season sessions with your favorite coach. What a great way to up your game. Check out Metafy.gg in the description below and take your game to the next level. Challenge yourself against trainers from around the world to compete for the biggest online prizing yet.
Are you ready for an unbelievable tournament unlike anything else you've ever seen before? The Shuffle Squad is proud to announce our newest tournament series, the Late Night Event, with an amazing grand prize that's bound to have you excited.
Players can compete via play.limitless.tcg.com's online tournament platform every Tuesday to get a chance to earn weekly prizes And every week, your placement in the tournament is tallied by points based on your best finishes to earn your rank for the late night invitational event.
The series will be conducted starting February 7th of 2023 and carry all the way through to the Invitational on July 9th of 2023, where the top players will be rewarded the grand prizing.
And the grand prize is a signed jersey and photo op with the entire Shuffle Squad, as well as a fully paid trip to the Pokemon World Championships in Yokohama, Japan. This includes hotel and airfare, whether you're a player or a spectator.
Don't forget to check out all the live coverage on our YouTube and Twitch channel of the top cuts of these events for every week. And subscribe so you can get notified where to watch the late night events invitational brought to you by the Shuffle Squad. Now get out there and start winning. We'll see you in Japan.